It's always just between us, all right?
You're tuned to Between Us at 938 Live. I'm Angela Lim, discussing relationship issues with my guests in the studio today. And of course, today we're focusing on a topic that many of us might be able to relate to, relating with in-laws and parents after marriage. How to have a great relationship with your in-laws. My two guests today from EMCC, Eagles Mediation Counseling Center. Diana Chandra is Head of Counseling Services, and Rachel Chan is a counselor at EMCC. And incidentally, Rachel is also going to share her experiences as a daughter-in-law. Very excited to talk to two of you today. Diana, Rachel, great to have you here.
Hey, hi, Angela.
I'm going to ask Diana the first question, which is, there's this common misconception or this idea that in-laws are not meant to get along, that people are always going to have conflict. What are your thoughts on that?
That's a very stereotypical view, isn't it, of in-laws? But I think that there are possibilities of getting on really well with your in-laws, and today I think Rachel could share that.
Well, and speaking from a personal perspective, we need to hear your tips, Rachel. You have a pretty good relationship with your mother-in-law, I understand.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, you have to share the secret. Tell us a little bit about the start as well. When you first got to know your husband's family, what were some of the things that you did or they did that made you feel comfortable?
Okay, I think it just started off with mutual respect, and we trust each other. It's very important, and we built on a very good relationship with one another. Mm-hmm. And I think the key word for me is appreciate little things that they do. Like when we were dating, and they would. My mother-in-law back then was not my mother-in-law, but she would call my husband and ask whether do we go back for dinner, that kind of thing. So I find it we really want to respect that kind of mutual relationship with one another. Yeah. So yeah.
Appreciation is a big thing, because when his parents actually asked you over as well, you felt loved and included in the family.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
What are some other things that you felt was very useful for you when it came to understanding and interacting with your in-laws?
I guess it's really a lot about communication, and especially at this time and age where we are so into social media, I do text my mother-in-law quite a bit.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
So she's quite savvy as well.
Yes, that's right.
So the frequency of contact is important. You do make the effort to connect with her. And of course, we're not just going to look at it from a daughter-in-law's perspective, but also bringing what it's like for the mother or the father-in-law also to kind of interact with the husband or the wife. Let's talk a little bit about, I guess, being mindful about certain things or misunderstandings that might come up. Diana, what are some common challenges that a lot of people have in their families when they marry into a different one?
Well, I think that one of the challenge could be about decision making. Sometimes when the couple has a tough decision to make, and when you come from a home where you're always talking to your own mother, your own parents about decisions, there's a tendency to go back to your own parents to chat with them, to find out what they're thinking about, and then inevitably to exclude your spouse from that decision process, which may actually kind of damage the relationship that you have with your spouse. Mm-hmm. So it's about including, actually it's not just including the in-laws, but it's first making a decision with your spouse first. And then of course it's possible to reflect that to your own parents, to see and ask them for their opinion.
Right. So you're saying, Diana, that actually no matter what decision you should make it as a couple first. That's where your priority is before consulting either parent.
That's right.
Okay. Do you agree with that, Rachel? Is that what you and your husband do?
Yes, that's what we have been doing. And we do have both of us will always be mindful that we have each other in mind first. And then all other opinions from our own parents will be taken as secondary.
Okay. I want to talk a little bit about this whole idea of sometimes when you meet your in-laws and your in-laws don't really like you, or, for some reason, they just can't see eye to eye with you, especially at the start, maybe. So what are some things that tend to come up? And Diana, how do you usually resolve these things?
I think it's always about perception. Like, for example, if the new daughter-in-law comes in and doesn't greet the mother-in-law, for example, and mother-in-law feels hurt or disrespected, and that can form a very lasting impression, isn't it? And so small things like this, one has to be mindful about respect, about being appreciative, and as you do that, you actually get to know her better because she's more open to welcoming you into the home.
Right. It goes both ways, doesn't it? Because let's say, as a daughter-in-law or son-in-law, perhaps, when you go and meet the parents, if you're perceived as disrespectful, then, it's very hard to turn things around. Conversely, sometimes as parents, you're very overprotective of the daughter or the son, and you tend to be very judgmental and very harsh about certain ideas you have about that person. Is there anything you can say to those parents then?
Well, I think that when you have a new daughter-in-law, you actually have one more person to love, one more person who would care for your son. And so it's almost like you're sharing the burden and you're not having to do that anymore. And so it's about welcoming a new party into the family.
Seeing it as a good thing is pretty important because, sometimes many daughter-in-laws might complain, or mother-in-laws as well, that there's some kind of competition sometimes because both of them want to look after the son. It could be the same in the case of the husband as well, where, people want to kind of take turns to look after the person. So how do you resolve that sort of, tension sometimes?
I think it's the perspective. There's not a competition. And sometimes parents are afraid that they might lose their son's love. But it's really not the case, isn't it? It's really about another person loving the son. And for the parent as well to love another extra person who actually deeply loves her own son.
Right. So looking at it that way is getting help with looking after each other. It's definitely a good thing for everyone. You also mentioned being appreciative. We're going to hear a bit more about Rachel's experience as well, about how, in small ways you can show your in-laws, that you appreciate them and you're really thankful for them, and how that can make a great relationship in the long run. Today we're talking about relating to in-laws and parents after marriage. My two guests today are from EMCC, Chandra, Head of Counseling Services, and Rachel Chan is a counselor at Eagles Mediation and Counseling Center. Stay tuned for more here on Between Us. Stay tuned.
Reset your relationships in Between Us. Our soulful encounter is always just between us on 938 Live.
Talking all about how to have a great relationship with your in-laws and parents after marriage today. Chandra, Head of Counseling Services at EMCC, and Rachel Chan telling us from her personal experience as a daughter-in-law. Rachel's also a counselor at EMCC. Now, earlier, Rachel, Diana was talking about appreciation as being a very important part of creating that bond between you and your in-laws. How do you, in your own way, show that you appreciate your mother and father-in-law?
Sometimes we'll bring them out for a meal together with our children, and I'll make sure that my children, actually from their own initiative, they will make cards for them, especially when it's their birthdays,
Okay.
And this really elate them a lot, and I'll always try to make effort to go out together as a family. Otherwise we will just have dinner at home, that kind of thing.
I guess because a lot of conflicts stem from each party not feeling very appreciated. It could be the other way around, where the daughter-in-law also feels that, I can never please you, or I can never do enough. Similarly, as in-laws, sometimes you help with childcare and you help with a lot of things at home, like housework, for example. How can we show appreciation apart from you taking them out for meals? Are there things we can communicate to them?
I think sometimes the challenge is about boundaries for parents who are babysitting. And perhaps if it is the in-laws and the wife in that relationship may feel that his parents are overprotecting or spoiling the children and so forth. And so there needs to be a communication between the couple to know what are the boundaries and what the parents can do and what they can't do. They need to communicate that to the parents, to the in-laws.
Right. I think that Diana touched on something that's quite a sticking point with a lot of people in these families, because bringing up the children, the parent-in-laws might think that I brought up you guys just fine, so my way is probably better. And as a couple, you might have different ideas on how you'd like to do that for your child as well. So, what is a good way to negotiate that? You do want to take into account the fact that your parents have more experience as well. How do you kind of bring all those viewpoints together in a healthy, constructive way?
Well, I think that the couple needs to know what they want and what they don't want first. So they need to discuss that. And then, if it is the wife's mother-in-law, the husband needs to communicate that to the mother-in-law with the wife at present, with the wife in present. And so that both of them, it would seem to the in-law that the couple is actually communicating that to her, and not just my son. Because if it is just my son, she may be thinking that, oh, the daughter-in-law put him to it. And that could create some tension between the two of them.
So definitely as a couple, you have to stay very strong as a team. You are one unit. And, as you mentioned earlier also, Diana, the decision-making process comes with the couple first and then including all the other members of the family. Now we're going to find out a bit more about some challenges that might come up from time to time and also how these are resolved. Rachel's also going to share a bit more from her experience about how mothers-in-law and fathers-in-law can actually help out, in making that relationship great as well. All this coming up in just a bit. We're talking about relating with in-laws and parents after marriage with my two guests today from EMCC, Diana Chandra, Head of Counselling Services, and Rachel Chan, Counsellor at EMCC. Sharing more in just a bit after headline news and sports. Stick around here at 938 Live.
Someone to tell it to is a fundamental human need, and what you say stays between us on 938 Live. It's always just between us, all right?
Contrary to popular belief, you can have great relationships with your in-laws and your parents after marriage. Chatting today with my two guests who will tell us a bit more about just how to do that. Diana Chandra is Head of Counselling Services at EMCC, and Rachel Chan is Counsellor at EMCC as well, and she's sharing her personal experiences as a daughter-in-law. Now, something that we've discussed earlier, Diana, the idea that you have to start as a team. The couple has to be a team and then incorporate the views of the parents. Now, one thing that, a lot of people tend to fight about when it comes to these things is bringing up the children. Some common things that do come up. Rachel, has there been any challenge for you and your mother or father-in-law when it came to this?
Of course, there's two different kind of approach. We have the modern kind of parenting, and they have the older kind of parenting. So,
what are some differences you notice in your experience? Your in-laws tend to be a certain way. What would that be?
Okay, maybe because maybe when we do discipline our children, they find it a bit not comfortable with the way we discipline them. Yeah, so there are differences when we come to disciplining our children. But my husband has his stance, so his parents would know that, my son is going to discipline our grandchildren, that kind of thing. So most of the time they will be leave us alone to do it. But of course, you can see that, with their facial expressions, they kind of not really agreeing how we discipline the children.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how would you resolve that then? Because, I'm sure, you also feel that you have the right as the mother to choose how you want to discipline your child. But at the same time, you do kind of respect the way your parents-in-law think. How do you resolve that difference?
Sometimes we'll just pull the children into the room, but one good thing is that we don't stay together, so much of this kind of discipline thing is not really seen by them. It's only when we go over to their place to visit them. When our kids were smaller, things happen, kids don't behave, and kids being kids, sometimes they make a lot of noise, that kind of thing. Yeah, so
discipline is definitely a big one. I mean, it could also be the flip side, right, where the older generation might feel that, sometimes you have to be, show tough love, in a way, and the parents might feel, it's a bit heart pain to see, your child being punished that way. So either way, both parties have to negotiate it, or how do you go about this, Diana? Because, while you say the couple should come first and that's their decision, but at the end of the day, you want to take all parties, ideas and suggestions in as well. How do you come to some kind of consensus on this?
I think Rachel was saying that sometimes our parents may have a different view to discipline. And I think it's important for the couple to just communicate that to the parent, communicate that together to the parent. And maybe sometimes nowadays we want to encourage our children rather than scold them and put them down. We want to make sure that their self-esteem isn't damaged. Whereas, I mean, perhaps in the older generation, they may not be as enlightened to have that approach. So it's really trying to explain to our parents how this would, how you would prefer it to be.
Again, the communication, the open communication is really important, and keep it calm, right? Don't escalate a conflict. If you're talking a little bit also, I mean, speaking of conflict, sometimes, you know, you feel really frustrated and then you turn to your parents for some advice or some help. Now, that's another very tricky one, because your spouse might take offense at the fact that you've turned to your parents, and then now all of you are kind of, you know, you feel like you're being turned on. So what do you think about that? Is that a good idea?
Well, you know, sometimes when, say, a daughter goes back home to her mom and pours out to just de-stress, to tell the mom about the pain that she's going through because the husband is doing this and that. And the mom, of course, because it's her mom, she would naturally want to protect the daughter. But I think that really doesn't help, because the husband then would feel very betrayed, because the mom would then maybe even go to the extent of scolding him, but definitely there will be some ill feelings towards him. And even when the relationship is repaired, you know, even when the couple have already made love and got back to good terms, but they may have forgotten to tell the mom, hey, we're already okay. But mom is still harboring all his ill feelings.
Right. I mean, in a way you're saying, Diana, don't get involved, you know, as parents who are tuning in now, you know, whether you're the in-law or you're the parent, if your daughter or son-in-law or your son or daughter comes to you and complains, what is a good thing to do in this case?
Well, the good thing, I think, is to say to your daughter, go back and talk to your husband. Settle it with him.
Okay. Do you agree with that, Rachel? Is that what you've been doing at home as well?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. We're going to hear a little bit more about how else we can actually kind of bridge the gap between the in-laws and yourself also. And we'll also come in from a perspective of if you're caught between, you say, your wife and your mom and dad, or vice versa, where you're caught between your husband and your mom and dad. What can we do about that to turn things around? My two guests today will tell us more. Diana Chandra, Head of Counselling Services at EMCC. Rachel Chan, also Counsellor at EMCC, sharing her personal experiences as a daughter-in-law. Stay tuned.
Reset your relationships in Between Us. Our soulful encounter is always just between us on 938 Live.
Talking all about having great relationships with your in-laws today with my two guests, Diana Chandra and Rachel Chan, both from Eagles Mediation and Counselling Centre, or EMCC. Let's hear a little bit from Diana, because if, you know, people tuning in now are thinking, but my relationship with my in-laws are already in a very bad state. We have a lot of misunderstandings. How do you start, you know, taking that first step to turn things around?
Well, I think the key word just now was about being appreciative. And I think kind words and good and appreciative gestures would always leave a mark. Mother-in-law will understand that, you know, you're trying to be kind to her, and that might help.
Sometimes it might be difficult to do that, you know, be the bigger person sometimes, swallow your pride a little bit and just kind of extend your hand. Rachel, has that been something that, you know, you do as well in your experience, being mindful and appreciative?
Yes, both me and my husband will try to have our own. We will respect each other's opinion, and when we present something or we decide something, we stand as couple. So we try not to have external factors or reasons to affect us. So that same applies to our parents. Yeah, as much as we honor them, as much as we respect them, we would tell them nicely that. Ba and Ma, you know, this is what we have decided. You know, somehow they will be able to accept that kind of approach rather than no, I say no, you know, that kind of thing.
Definitely have that dialogue and that communication.
Yeah.
Now, Diana, we're talking about a lot of these challenges that do come up from time to time between the couple and the in-laws. If there were some things that we can do just to set in place like a great relationship, what are some tips you have for our listeners, you know, based on your experience working with so many families and couples? What can we do to mitigate these challenges?
I think that when we marry a person, we don't just marry the person, we marry the entire family. And that includes mother-in-law and father-in-law and siblings. And so the first and foremost is actually one's loyalty to your spouse. Because you are a team and there are no opposing sides.
Okay, so that as the first step is to be united. You don't take sides with the family, even if it's tempting. Are there other things we can do in terms of trying to understand where the other party is coming from, sometimes when having to accommodate the family's requests?
I think that a lot of in-laws are just afraid that they'll be left out. And so to be inclusive is, I think, a good idea. That parents then don't feel like they've lost their son or they've lost their daughter, but that they have in fact added to the family.
Okay, so that keeping that positive frame of mind. And on another note, if you were caught between your wife or husband and your parents, what would you say to people in that position where they feel very stuck and they can't really help the whole thing?
Yeah, there's a lot of cases that I see where the spouse is made to choose between his wife and his mother, and that's a very difficult position to be placed into. But it is extremely tough, and I think my suggestion is not to put a spouse in that position, but rather to listen to what they have to say, and always be there to get the positive side to things.
Now, on a final note, Rachel, if there's anything you'd like to tell our listeners, I mean, it's quite amazing that you do have a great relationship with your in-laws. I think very enviable. Many people aim for that. Tell us a bit about any takeaway message you might have for listeners on how they can start having that great relationship.
I guess it's what I first started, to be appreciative towards your in-laws and even your own parents. We have to be very sensitive in picking up things that they have, kindness that they have contributed to our family or even to ourselves as a couple. Having that support from them is really, really important, especially when we have children, and sometimes we needed them to help us babysit our children, and things like that. We have to try to appreciate them. Even saying a thank you would be a good thing. Yeah, I guess Asians, we don't usually use the word thank you.
Right, and as simple as that, right? Just 2 words makes a huge difference. I mean, be appreciative, be inclusive with the rest of the family, and also, more importantly, communicate very well with each other. You shouldn't really have a problem. And as Diana was saying, the most important thing is to remember that the couple is the team, and you always have to come from that standpoint where, as a couple, you stand united and you can incorporate any other opinion after that. Thanks so much, Diana and Rachel, for sharing your experience. We're talking today about having a great relationship with your in-laws. Here on Between Us, I'm Angela Lim. Thank you so much for tuning in today.
Someone to tell it to is a fundamental human need, and what you say stays between us on 938 Live.